All right, here we go. Keeping true to the NBA reality that nothing happens in the month of August, the Knicks just barely get it in under the gun with about 6 hours remaining in the month of July. They have inked Mikal Bridges, their starting. It would be interesting. Will he be their starting small forward next season? Will he be their starting shooting guard? I guess that remains to be seen. But their starting wing, the guy that they gave up the motherlode for last offseason to acquire from the Brooklyn Nets, not in terms of, we've talked about the draft picks that went out in that deal so many times. And obviously there's a lot of attention that has been paid to them as it should be. That was not a superstar trade package because there were no players of note going out in the deal. The only guy making any money going out in that trade never played another game in the NBA before he retired. Shout out to Bogey. But they still gave up all of their tradable picks, essentially. They retained a couple swaps, which meant to them, they said, all right, we know in making this trade, this is the big move that we are going to be able to do. And we are not going to be able to make another big move, at least not for a player that the rest of the league desires, which is why the Karl-Anthony Towns transaction goes in another category, because Karl-Anthony Towns' salary made him someone that, for as much as other teams might like the player, not a whole lot of teams out there were going to be able to inherit that contract. Mikal Bridges, different story, in large part because of the dirt sheet contract that he was on. So that is why they needed to give up all those picks, and they decided, hey, we're cool with this being the way that we use our draft picks. And then last season happened, and the team won the second most games that they have in 30 or close to 30 years, 20 some odd years. And they made it further in the playoffs than they had in a quarter century. And Mikal Bridges unquestionably played a large part in that. He played more minutes than anybody in the NBA. He ran more miles than anybody in the NBA. And he was the Iron Man that he was billed to be. He had some moments of utter brilliance during the regular season, a month-long stretch in December where he was the best shooter alive, a stretch when Jalen Brunson went out, when he was really guiding the offense. And that all led us up to the playoffs, which were unquestionably a mixed bag. If you look at his overall efficiency in the playoffs, leaves a bit to be desired. But if you look at the biggest moments, the biggest quarters of the biggest games, who was there making big shots on the offensive end and making big plays, in particular, some late plays against the Boston Celtics on the defensive end, but Mikal Bridges. And yet, going into this offseason, I think there was a certain level of doubt as to whether the organization was all in on this core that they had assembled, because as anybody who watched this team on a regular basis last season knew, there was something in the water wasn't quite right. And I think everybody had their theories as to what was the reason why it didn't add up, and in particular, why the starting lineup did not seem to be something that was, the whole was greater than the sum of the parts. And in fact, the whole was quite a bit less than the sum of the parts. And that absolutely continued into the playoffs, to the point where finally down 0-2 in the Pacers series, that starting lineup was changed. Two mixed results, shall we say. But as they were eliminated from Indiana, even with the specter of game one hovering over their heads and the thought of what might have been and what could have, what fate could have transpired had they pulled out a game that 999 times out of 1,000 they pull out, there was still this lingering something as of uncertainty as to whether they would bring the team back as in totality, give or take a small move or a couple small signings this summer, And then a couple days after the season ended, they fired Tom Thibodeau. And I want to be very careful about how I say this because I do not, be very clear, want to intimate or imply that Mikal Bridges signed this extension today because Tom Thibodeau got fired, along the lines of Mikal Bridges, in those exit meetings, which we have heard so much about and read so much about and pondered so much about and would have loved to be a fly on the wall for all of them. But in particular, I'm assuming there was one with Mikal Bridges, and I would bet my last red cent that James Dolan was a part of that meeting. Who knows what was said? Do I think for a second that Mikal Bridges said something along the lines of, it's either him or me? No, I don't. I don't think he's that type of person, and I just don't think that that's something that would come from a player and a person of his caliber for whatever issues he may have had with Thibs or being in this environment this season. But I do think because Tom Thibodeau was fired, at that moment, it became not 100% crystal clear to me, but like 90 some odd percent clearer to me, or more likely in my mind, at least, that the rest of the core was going to be back, and that barring the necessity to include Mikal Bridges in a trade that they knew was going to transpire this summer, I figured Mikal Bridges was going to extend. And I don't think I really ever had that much doubt or concern about that because, and again, to bring it back to the Thibs piece, it's not that it was a him or me scenario, or it's not that the front office said, well, we either got to fire Thibs or we got to, trade Bridges or Cat or whoever else you think they would need to get rid of. To me, it was the team, the front office, and the owner, I'm sure, a little bit, looked at the situation and they said, we believe that that the roster is not the problem. Or let me rephrase that. The roster is not the thing that is preventing us from going all the way. We believe we have the goods, give or take, seventh or eighth man, the addition of a seventh or eighth man, and give or take, some more time to come together and cohesion and the whole thing. Now, before we continue on this line of thought, is that to say that if a Giannis Antetokounmpo situation arises, that they will not be very much all in on that? No, that is not to say that. But that is a different animal. That is a different consideration. That is hey, one of the three best players in the league has become available. Every team is going to try to get that guy, including the Knicks. No. This is like, absent any major opportunities that should come to pass, we're cool running back this core because we believe we've made the most necessary change or the most consequential change that is going to help carry us forward and raise our ceiling. And of course, that change was changing the head coach. And in changing the head coach, and this is what will bring us back to Bridges, hiring someone new in Mike Brown. But not only that, putting together a more collaborative, there's the buzzword of the summer, coaching staff that will be able to get the most out, not only of these players individually, but as a collective unit. Because why were we all so excited about the Mikal Bridges trade to begin with? It was because we felt, and I think everybody in the league felt, this was a guy who was as plug and play a player of this caliber as there was in the league, to the point where he's only going to make everybody else better, and he's certainly not going to make anybody else worse. And I think they looked at the situation last year and said, yeah, that didn't really happen. Not that it was Bridges' fault or anyone's fault, but that something wasn't adding up. And I think they feel like moving forward, we're going to get more of that vision, more of the thing that had us all so excited last summer. And we'll see if it happens. I am very hopeful. I'm optimistic. And I think Mikal Bridges is going to be a big part of that. And obviously, they feel that Mikal Bridges is going to be a big part of that. Not only that, but Mikal Bridges feels that he is going to be a very big part of that. And that, to me, today is my biggest takeaway. Because, and again, I don't want to bring it all back to Thibs because I don't think it was all about Thibs. But if Mikal Bridges had any serious misgivings about his future here in New York, about whether he actually wanted to be a part of this team, a part of this core, whether he wanted to keep playing pick and roll defense with Cat occasionally as his partner in crime there, whether he wanted to be the brunt of a lot of criticism, which certainly came his way last year, although that kind of flipped in the playoffs, and I think he made a lot of new fans during the postseason. Like, all of that stuff in extending now and extending for fewer dollars than he could have extended for now, and then obviously a lot less money that he potentially could have gotten next summer. I think he's telling you that, I mean, this should be obvious, but he wants to be here. And I think the fact and the timing of it, and we talked about this recently, Jeremy and Andrew talked about this recently, the timing of it is very interesting because it is before August 6th, which means technically Mikal Bridges can get traded before next trade deadline, this season. If he had waited until after August 6th to sign the extension, that would not have been possible. But, devil's in the details because this contract has a trade kicker. And my guess is that all the parties here were on the same page. The Knicks, I would guess, in getting this extension done now, wanted to maintain that shred of flexibility because, hey, you never know. But in giving the trade kicker to Mikal Bridges, I think that they were voicing loud and clear, like, look, we love that you want to be here, and we want to make damn well sure that you know that we want you here. And we think you are part of the solution, and we think that you are part of the solution long-term moving forward. Now, how much of this contract extension had to do with everything I talked about at the top of the live stream, which was the fact that they went out and they gave up all these picks for Mikal Bridges, and were they going to turn around and, flip him in a year or a year and 6 months after that? That was always going to be unlikely, especially given how this front office has operated, in terms of always trying to get the better player back in the deal, which again brings us to there's only one trade out there which we could have ever envisioned maybe involving Mikal Bridges. And as of right now, looks like that dude is staying in Milwaukee. Although, again, because Mikal Bridges signed this extension now, doesn't take that possibility off the table this summer, because we know that there's some other Knicks making a fair bit of money, but I digress. So taking less, $6 million less, as much as it could potentially have an impact on the second apron moving forward, I'll get to that in a second. The symbolism of it, more than anything, I think matters to me more, because it says, again, loud and clear, Mikal Bridges is willing to play ball with an organization and a team that, maybe things weren't always amazing last season, regardless of whose fault that may have been. So that's great. As for the second apron stuff, obviously the Knicks are capped at the second apron this season. They cannot go over the second apron by virtue of the fact that they used the taxpayer mid-level exception to sign Gershon Yabusele, not the full taxpayer, but the fact that they used even $1 more than the minimum and thus needed to dip into the taxpayer mid-level exception to sign Yabusele means they're capped at the second apron. So they will not be a second apron team this season. They cannot be. They are not allowed to be. Next season, and Jeremy wasn't able to hop on here now. If he was, I would let him take this part. But in short, because we've been talking about this really for 2 years, the 26-27 season was always going to be the season that we presumed would be the season that they would go above the second apron because, frankly, it would be really tough for them to avoid it. That said, if you look at their salary cap, and we're not going to sit here and go through it with a fine-tooth comb right now, it is in range. It is possible that they could duck the second apron for at least one more year, which is why, and I don't know when we're going to get the contract details on this. I can't imagine we're going to get it tonight or maybe not even in the next few days. But I would guess that we are going to see a contract that either stays flat from year 1 to year 2 or decreases from year 1 to year 2. And then starts going up from there, as my wife is texting me that she can't get an Uber from the train, which is why this is going to be an emergency live stream on the shorter side. So the fact that this even brings the possibility into play that the Knicks might be able to duck the second apron for an additional year, and we're not going to sit here and talk about all the ramifications that come with going over the second apron. The point is that if you are a NBA team and it is even remotely possible that you could duck the second apron, you are going to do everything in your power to do so, because it just makes team building so much easier, both in the present tense and moving forward, because you put off all of those penalties, potential penalties, actual penalties for another year. So I'll be very fascinated to see the structure of this contract once it comes out. Mostly, though, I'm just happy that this team is in place and that, again, for as much as I have had my doubts, and I still have some doubts about whether this team has what it takes to go all the way, to beat an Oklahoma City Thunder in the finals, to beat what is going to be a very talented Cleveland Cavaliers team that I would guess that they're going to match up against at some point in the postseason. Like, there's some really, really good teams out there in the league. Thankfully, a lot of them are out west. Even so, can the Knicks be the absolute very best team in the league? We'll see. But here's the last thing I'll say before we get to the super chats, and we have a couple in the hopper here. The reason why, again, barring a trade for who, the reason why it was always going to be so unlikely that they would move on from Mikal Bridges this offseason is move on from him for what? Because if you start going down the job description of who they would need to replace this Mikal Bridges, you know what you end up with? Mikal Bridges. Because even though he was not the best version of himself last year, it doesn't change the fact that they need, give or take a little bit more volume above the arc, and give or take maybe a little bit, niftier screen navigation from time to time. He's exactly the guy that they need to round out this roster and to fill in the gaps between Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns and OG Anunoby. So that's why it never made sense to move on from him. And what I love that they did this offseason is, okay, they looked at the situation last year and they said, all right, what do we need more of? Mikal Bridges maybe didn't give us enough above the break stuff. Let's go sign two guys who love to shoot above the break threes in Jordan Clarkson and Gershon Yabusele. We don't think that the Mikal Bridges, Karl-Anthony Towns pick and roll defensive combination is tenable for another entire season in the playoffs. We've already heard some intimation from Ian Begley that there is some thought within the organization that they're going to go ahead and start Mitchell Robinson potentially next to Karl-Anthony Towns, or that some in the organization like the idea of that, and that factored into the Yabusele signing. So Mikal Bridges is not the problem. They need to figure out how to make him even more of the solution, and they're putting their money where their mouth is today. That's pretty much all I have to say. So on that note, I'll go take the super chats that we have here. First one is from Drew P. Mitch extension more or less likely now. I don't think this impacts the Mitch extension possibility one bit. I think Mitch it's a different situation. The dollars are obviously a lot less. And there's an injury question. And that's what makes the two situations so unanalogous, which is that you have one player who is quite literally the Iron Man of the league and another player who has not been able to get through an entire season unscathed. And might the organization be looking at this with Mitch and be like, you know what? Let's maybe slow play this one, unless he's willing to accept a number that is way more towards the team-friendly end of the spectrum. And I would imagine that that's the sort of thing that would get done much closer to the start of the regular season. Thanks, Drew. Next up, we got this one from Kevin Danishevsky. What's going on, Kev? I'm sure you're a happy man today. In my opinion, this locks in their core moving forward. I mean, with one possible exception, I would agree with you. Very excited, but for my trade machine mind, it's going to be sad that this is the end of the road for now. Look, I know you love your fake trades. The best thing for this team, and I was one of those with ants in my pants after the season, looking for them to kick the tires on a Durant trade. And I quickly realized that was really fucking stupid. Why are you going to go trade for a soon-to-be 37-year-old star who would require additional hoops for you to jump through to just make the team have as high a ceiling as it did with the version of the roster you just had? This was always the smart play. Again, barring one of a very select few players becoming available. And if that happens, they will cross that bridge when they come to it. Thank you, Kevin. Bill Peter, friend, what's going on? Bill, I think he will be better in year 2. Brown may run offense through him at times with JB off the ball. Happy summer, Knicks fans. Yeah, Benji especially has talked a lot about this. The notion of Mikal Bridges' role and his usage and how he was used. And just, be careful about this idea that all of a sudden we're going to see this brand new Mikal Bridges, because this ultimately is a player with, I'm not going to say a limited skill set because that's not accurate, but there are some things that he is not as strong with. There is a reason that he's never been the sort of player who is going to run pick and rolls a game. And we saw that, by the way, when he had the ball more, when Jalen Brunson was injured. He does have that high dribble occasionally. He is a little bit loose with the ball. Teams that are able to play up on him, whether through switching or some other means, as opposed to playing a drop defense, he's not nearly as effective getting into the teeth of the defense against them. But hey, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And I do absolutely, to your point, Bill, expect Mike Brown, and I'm sure the Knicks expect Mike Brown as well, to add a lot more flavor and verve to this offense and find creative ways to hit that gray area with Mikal Bridges, where he's not trying to guide the offense into traditional means, but he's able to do more. He has some more responsibility. And I think, again, that's one of the reasons why they felt comfortable making this investment today. And then I think this might be the last one. Maxwell Warner, thank you very much for the very generous contribution here in the end of July. $5 million annual, less than OG, feels like solid value. I actually hadn't done the math in my head. I will take your word for it, because what is that? 37.5. OG was 42.5. Yeah. So yeah, $5 million less than average annual value. Expected to have a much better season with no Thibs. I mean, look, it's sad but true. I'm not about to sit here and disagree. And much to my own chagrin, I found myself saying after the season, there was just no universe where you could both bring back the coach and bring back Mikal Bridges. I just didn't think that was smart. And they didn't. And welcome back, JM. Thank you, Maxwell. Yeah, I think everybody should feel that he's going to have a better season. And again, to be clear, not that he had a bad season. He didn't have a bad season. Mikal Bridges was really good last year. But it's nice to know that he could get even better. So on that note, thank you, everybody, for checking out this emergency live stream. If you dig what you saw here and you like what we do here at Knicks Film School, please subscribe to this channel, like this video. Check out the podcast. We got a 25 for 25 series that the first episode is dropping on Monday. We are so excited about that. So make sure you're here for all of those episodes that are going to be filling you with glorious Knicks content for the next 2 months. But in the meantime, hope everybody enjoyed this, and I'll be back with more fun and games before you know it. Peace out.